What's up, fresties? Where's Waldo coming at you live from my bedroom? Where's Waldo coming at you live from my bedroom? I'm not wearing a hat. It's September. Today is sort of a Wattpad Wednesday, sort of just a writing Wednesday. I think I've called one of these that in the past before, so we're gonna call it that again, because this doesn't just apply to Wattpad. Today's topic is how to stay interested in your story. This has been requested a couple times now, and I've been meaning to make this for a while, so let's get into my best tips on how to stay interested in your story, how to stay motivated to write the same story and not go ahead and jump ship and start working on a totally new project after like 10 chapters. My first tip, this is a big one, the biggest one, the hugest tip of them all, is to figure out, are you a plotter or are you a pantser or a plantster? You could be in between. Basically, is it better for you as an individual to have a story that is plotted out in every aspect from beginning to finish, all the little details sorted out? Are you a planner? Or would you rather go in completely blind and figure things out as you go and develop the story as you're writing it? Are you a pantser? Or maybe you're in between and you like to have the beginning of the story figured out, the middle and the end, but all those little minute details, all those little, you know, extra scenes and stuff like that, you figure those out as you go along. The reason why this is so important to figure out is because this genuinely does help with your motivation when you are staying true to your particular writing needs. For example, I am a planner through and through. I need every little detail planned out in that outline or else I am not going to finish that story, and I know that from experience. And the reason that this happens with me is that if I don't know exactly where the story is going, I lose motivation. I get all confused. I start thinking about like all the 40 million different things that could potentially happen in the story, and I don't know which one I want to pick. Whereas if I have a plan, then I know exactly where I'm going and my brain doesn't wander off in all these different directions or, you know, start getting tempted to think about other story ideas that might stem off of the different directions, all that stuff. But on the other hand, I know plenty of people who say that if they plan every aspect of their story like that, they get bored, they lose interest as soon as all that stuff is written down. So for these people, it's important to not go that in-depth in planning, or maybe not even plan at all. If planning bores you and makes you have no interest in the story anymore because you're like, well, I already know what's happening, so why am I here? Then obviously that method is not for you, and if you plan, then you're probably gonna lose motivation. So this is like my number one, do this before you do anything else type of tip, because really when you get to the center of who you are as a writer, what you need as a writer, that is going to help with your motivation 100%. That is a mighty lipstick stand. Surprised I have any left on after that. My second tip, why do I always do that? I'll do like that spinny-roo thingy. My second tip is to keep a list of media that inspires your story. When you need that motivation boost, you can go to this list and consume any of those pieces of media and, you know, really hone back in on what inspires you about this story. For example, if I was writing a zombie book, I would probably sit down and watch Day of the Dead. I already watch that like once a month anyways, so I wouldn't really need to, but for my book Oliver Osmond Lives Again, the main character Oliver was heavily inspired by Igby from the movie Igby Goes Down. So if I really needed to, you know, zone in on Oliver and just get into his headspace again, I could sit down and watch that movie and just get inspired for this like rich boy sad character. Keeping a list of all the things that have inspired you on your journey for this story, you know, maybe made the idea pop into your head in the first place, or maybe just the atmosphere in general of a certain movie or TV show, or even a playlist or an album, anything like that, having it written down somewhere where you can go back and look and be like, you know what, I am feeling totally out of the headspace of this project. I need to hone back in on it. Let me go through and listen to this playlist or watch this movie. That sort of thing can really help and really just reignite that spark that set you off into writing this in the first place. My third tip kind of ties into that last tip, which is to play around with fun stuff. Maybe you are just feeling super uninspired for the writing at the moment, and it's fine. You can take a step back. You're allowed to take a little break. Writing doesn't always have to just be about writing. You know, you can go ahead and do all the other fun stuff that comes with creating a story. You can make playlists, mood boards, you can draw your characters, you know, make your own fan art. One thing that I think is really beneficial is to just make lists or answer questionnaires that just give a bunch of random facts about your character or characters or your story location or anything like that. You can find a lot of these, I think, especially on Tumblr, where it's just lists of like hundreds of questions about random stuff about your character that at the end of the day most likely isn't going to make it into the final draft, but it might. And now you have this character that is like 100 times more fleshed out, and you know all these little intricacies about them. You're gonna feel way more connected to them. The same thing goes for any type of setting. Anything that makes you feel more connected to your story and more knowledgeable about your story is definitely going to help you cultivate that interest in your story. But again, this is where we go back to tip number 1, and you need to know yourself as an author, because maybe for some people the fun of writing is figuring out all those little details as they go along, and they don't necessarily want to just sit down and answer 100 questions about their character. For some people this might not be helpful, but I think for a lot of people it's fun and it's going to really get them in the headspace of their story. Plus, for playlists and mood boards and stuff, that's not really like stuff that you would discover while you're writing anyways, so I think everybody can have fun with those. Tip number 4 is another pretty big one, a very important one, which is to remember your why. If you are lacking motivation for your story, sit down and ask yourself, remind yourself, why did I start writing this story in the first place? Sometimes remembering that reason is all the reason that you need to be like, hey, that's right, I kind of forgot about that. Let me sit down and get back to work. Maybe your story has a very important message that you want to share, like a really deep moral that is just so important to you. Maybe you just love your characters and you need to share them with the world. Or maybe you're like me and some projects are purely for self-indulgent reasons and you just want to sit down and have a fun time while you're writing. That is reason enough to sit down and write. Every writer has a why for every story. And I personally don't think that any why is more important than any other why. If you are writing a little fan fiction with a self-insert Mary Sue, dating your favorite blorbo, your little scrunkly man, and that's your reason why, and you just want to have fun with that, girl, me too. But on the other hand, if you have a super deep message, just something that is gonna tug at people's heartstrings, that you want people to read and get real value out of, and like you want to change people's lives basically, and that's your why, and you need to commit to that why the same that you would commit to scrunkly blorbo why. All whys are important. I feel like I've lost my train of thought here. What I'm trying to say is, whatever your why is, don't feel like it's too daunting, and at the same time don't feel like it's not important enough. Whatever your reason is for writing, it's good enough. Another reason why that you might have is that you have a deadline. And that brings us to tip number 4? Tip number 5, which is to get more motivated for your story. Set a deadline for yourself if you don't already have one. Or not even necessarily a deadline, but just a goal. Both of these things I find personally can really help me feel like, okay, let me sit down, get these words on the page because I want to meet that goal. Even if maybe I don't necessarily feel like writing that day, if I have this goal looming over my head, like let's say I want to write 30,000 words in a month. I want to write 100. I want to write 1,000 words every day. I'm not that bad at math. If I have that goal in my mind, I'm committed to it, and I've already been working on it for a little bit, even if I don't feel like writing that day, I'm gonna be like, but that goal though, I want to meet that, so let me just sit down, do a couple writing sprints, get these words on the page. It doesn't matter if they suck, we are meeting that goal. I think obviously this is one of the reasons why National Novel Writing Month is so popular, because it helps people feel like this is the beginning of my journey, this is the end of my journey, let me take these 30 days to really commit and do the dang thing and sit down and write a book. And they're motivated to do that because not only is it like a whole community thing, which is also really helpful, but at the end of the day it's a goal that they have set for themselves, and it's also a deadline. In relation to that last tip, I actually did not write this on my little page. Writing sprints. If you're not feeling motivated, this doesn't necessarily help give you motivation, but if you're not feeling motivated, if you sit down and do like 3 writing sprints of 30 minutes anyways, you're gonna end up with, I mean, at least like 500 words. If you really commit to doing a sprint and not worry about making good sentences, screw the grammar, whatever for right now, just right? I'm not promising that you're gonna have the most amazing writing session where, you know, you're really into your story and you're having a great time and all that, but you will end the day with words on the page, and sometimes that's what matters, and that's what is gonna make you feel happy about your story, because you're at least making progress. And sometimes I feel like making progress adds to the motivation well, whereas if you're just sitting there stagnant waiting for the motivation to hit, it's not gonna come. You have to sit down and just actually put in some work in order to feel like, hey, this is actually going somewhere. For our final tip, what is it? Ah, right. Okay, this is one that I have just recently discovered for myself, which is do not force yourself to write chronologically. I was one of those people where, because I'm very much a planner and I have everything written out in my outline, so I'm like, okay, well, let me just write the outline from start to finish. Sometimes it doesn't work that way, and I just have to accept that, even though I'm usually the type of person who likes to go from point A to B to C to D to E to, you know, that whole alphabet. Let's say that, sticking with the alphabet metaphor, you are on point D of your story, but man, you are feeling so inspired to sit down and write point H today, but you're like, I can't sit down and write point H because I haven't written all the points between point D and point H. Just write point H. Just do it. If that's what you are feeling called to do when you sit down to write, just do it. Wherever the motivation lies, that's where you should go. At least this is what I found for myself. And it was difficult for me to like actually give myself the freedom to move on to a point of the story that was not the point of the story that was next in line for me to be working on. But I have found that it is actually quite beneficial for me if I sit down to write a scene that I am really motivated to work on that day instead of one that is just next in line. The word count difference can be like 2,000 words. Like, I will sit down and write 3,000 words of that scene that was calling to me versus, oh, I only sat down and wrote 100. Why do I keep doing that? I only sit down and wrote 1,000 words of this other scene. So yes, when I eventually get back to point H in this metaphor, I probably will have things that I need to tweak a little bit, things I need to add or take away, depending on all the stuff that happened after point D. But there's really not gonna be that much editing that I have to do. It works for me. Go where the motivation takes you. If you have that motivation for something, take advantage of it. These are tips that I have found out after years and years and years of having the struggle of dropping projects and moving on to new projects, and then dropping those projects and moving on to new projects. If you have been struggling with that, don't feel bad, because every writer does it. I hope these tips are helpful. If you have any tips that I did not mention, feel free to drop them in the comments below for all our fellow writers here and me. Thank you so much for watching, subscribing, almost 2,000 subscribers. That's crazy. And I hope that I will see you in the next video. Also, I hate that I kept this in frame the whole time, but I noticed it too late and then I was like, whatever. I can't shift it now, it would be too weird. Why would I get that ad? Why would I get that ad?